Yes, I can. Well, welcome everyone who is here and everyone who is watching this on YouTube or wherever you might be watching it later. We have a special speaker today, and I am very excited to hear what he has to say today. So Rachel is going to do the prayer for us, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about our speaker before he begins.
Okay, let's pray to start off our meeting. Dear Jesus, thank you that we can have a meeting today, and thank you that we can learn more about you. And please help us as we have this meeting.
Okay, so we have with us today Harold Williams, and my family calls him Uncle Harold because he is a very dear friend to us, and we like to hang out at their house a lot, which is actually where I am right now. But he used to be a math and science teacher at the academy here in Campion Academy and the academy in Nebraska as well, when there used to be one here. So I will turn the time over to you now.
Good afternoon. Am I on? Is it okay? The story you're about to hear is an old Romanian legend. The rural school children of Romania love to hear this story over and over again, and it features a poor peasant named Peter. We're just going to call him Peter. And Peter had a little plot of land right next door to a very wealthy count, Count Anton. Peter's wife had died about 3 years ago, a year after his favorite horse died. So he felt lonely, and yet he was a devout Christian man. He always had morning and evening worships. He had 2 animals left. He had Bessie the cow and Tildy the goat. And these 2 animals provided him, along with his garden on his little 4-acre plot of land, provided him with a livelihood. He would save up the rich cream from Bessie the cow, put it in a crock, and he would make cheese from Tildy the goat's milk. And he would take some of these things to town, which was 3/4 of a mile directly south, a little village, and he could sell these things and get enough money to buy some other necessities, but he certainly wasn't getting rich. So he had done this, and he put the little coins that he had extra up in a little bowl on the mantle. He really tried to be friendly to Count Anton next door. This count had several hundred acres of property, manicured lawns, gardens. It was an architecturally landscaped land that he had out behind his very mansion, his gravestone mansion. It had gardens and walkways. It had fountains and statues up on pedestals, many flower gardens. And in his house, his palatial mansion up on 2nd floor was almost totally devoted to his bedroom on the west end. And Count Anton would love to get up in there, walk around his bedroom and look down upon the world. And that's the way he was, kind of an arrogant narcissist. This one morning, he was walking around his bedroom, looking down on the world, and he started on the north side where he could look down at his own property. And as he came left and began to look down toward the west, that's where Peter's house was. And he began to mutter and scowl and complain to himself, why do I have to live next to Peter? That guy is making my real estate value go down. I can hardly stand him. And he knew that Peter was a Christian. In fact, that very morning, Peter had prayed for Count Anton that that his heart would be softened. But here was Count Anton belittling the fact and bemoaning and angry with the fact that he had to live next door to this peasant. And so he ranted and raged and had a very bad day the rest of the day. And as he went to bed that night, he was saying to himself, "What in the world could I do? How could I get rid of Peter once and for all? I don't want to have to look out the window at his property anymore. How can I get rid of him?" And as he went to sleep, he hatched a plan just as he was going to sleep that brought a cruel grimace and a sneer on his face. "I've got it. I will get up before sunrise. I will see if I can carry out my plan tomorrow." And with that, Count Anton decided that maybe he had a plan to get rid of Peter. That evening, Peter, for his worship, looked at 2 Peter 3:12, which says, "All who live for Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution," little realizing how soon that was going to be a prophecy for Peter himself. So the two neighbors went to sleep, and Count Anton got up before daybreak the next morning. He headed downstairs and had his groomsman for his horse bring his black stallion with the big flowing mane and hook it up to his buggy. And off he went toward town to stop at the local cafe, which he figured way back in the back corner, there would be two thugs back there, and he wanted their services. And Count Anton marched in as though he owned the place, marched right back into the dim, dark corners. And sure enough, these two thugs were seated across from each other at the table, enjoying their breakfast. Without so much as "may I sit by you," he just barged right in and sat beside one of the guys as the guy uncomfortably moved over. And Count Anton had 2 gold sovereigns in his hand. He placed one in front of each man, and they started to reach out, and he says, "Don't you touch that." They pulled their hands back like they were being burnt with fire. Count Anton continued, "I came here to see if I could hire you guys, and those gold sovereigns can be yours if you will carry out my plan undeviatingly, not having any excuse, but following precisely what I tell you to do." And the guys nodded their heads obediently. Incidentally, these gold sovereigns, each one would represent about 10 years of labor for guys, excuse me, that were unskilled. So their eyes got big when they saw how much wealth Count Anton was offering them. And he leaned over close to them so they could hear as he described his plan. And they said, "Yes, we can carry that out. Remember, you're supposed to do that before sunrise tomorrow morning." "Yes, we got it. And Count Anton then gave them a stern warning. "If you deviate from this plan in any way, I will come find you. I will extract my wealth back from you, and you will wish that you were never born on this earth." "Yes, sir, yes, sir." And Count Anton, with that, got up and marched out of the cafe, got into his buggy, and roared back the 3/4 mile straight north to his property, where there was an east-west road going in front of his and in front of Peter's. And he turned into his property, which had wrought iron fence all around his premises and wrought iron gates that were beautifully made, and they were swung open by his servants, and when he got inside, they were latched shut. And he, with great satisfaction and a sneer and a smile on his cruel face, he was clapping his hands. "I think I've got the plan. I think it's going to happen. I hope." All that day, he was relishing the idea that maybe his plan would work. He slept a good night's sleep, and next door, poor peasant Peter had told Bessie the cow and Tildy the goat good night, and tucked them into, well, not tucked them in, but put them in the little barn. And he made sure that his front gate was shut and latched, because he didn't want his animals wandering away. He couldn't afford to buy any new ones. And he had a nice worship and went to bed thanking the Lord for his life. Before daybreak the next morning, two thugs, if you could have seen them in the darkness, were scurrying north to Count Anton's property, but they didn't go in there. Instead, they turned a little to the left, to the west, and crept as noiselessly as they could up Peter's gravel driveway, carefully unlatching the gate and going in and hoping that Bessie and Tildy wouldn't cause any noises as they put little ropes around each neck so they could lead the animals out of the gate. And when they got them out, so far so good, Peter hadn't awakened to come out and see what was going on. They latched the gate, took them out onto the east-west road, about 50 yards to the left, and then up Count Anton's driveway. And sure enough, the large wrought iron gates were unlocked just as the Count had promised. And they took Bessie the cow and Tildy the goat, put them in past the gate, took the ropes off of them, and shooed them on in to the manicured lawns and gardens of Count Anton's palatial estate. And then noiselessly as they could, they shut the gate and high-fived themselves as they trudged on back to town with glee in their eyes. They knew they had carried out the plan to the finest detail, and the gold sovereigns were theirs, and they were very happy. Well, Bessie the cow and Tildy the goat were happy too, because they had never seen such lush vegetation that was fresh green grass growing. And so Bessie started to nibble on the fresh green grass, and she even liked some of the flowers, and she ate the blossoms. They didn't taste too bad. And Tildy the goat was devoted mostly to all the flowers. She ate all the red roses, all the yellow roses, all the white roses, and she was about to dig up some bulbs that looked tasty when Bessie the cow was turning to get another big mouthful of beautiful green grass, and her rump bumped one of the pedestals upon which these carved statues of the counts were standing, and she bumped it enough that it teetered and tottered and fell to the ground. It was a marble statue of a beautiful maiden, and it broke one of her arms off and broke her nose off as it hit the ground. And that noise woke up the Count, and he grinned with an evil satisfaction. Oh, I think the damage is going on. Yes. So he got up and got dressed and went out to look over his grounds. And sure enough, there were cow hoof prints all over his finely manicured lawns. His gardens were trampled, and there were fresh cow pies because Bessie the cow was paying for every bite that she ate by depositing nice little cow pies in pavement. And now Count Anton was sure that he had provided enough damage. So he called his servants to put Bessie the cow and Tildy the goat out of the way so that they wouldn't do any more damage. And Count went back upstairs to his bedroom and got his finest, most intimidating clothes on and came snarling downstairs, trying to look as angry as he could, and out the gate and turned right and came up the gate, up through the driveway for Peter's house. Swung the gate open, came up to Peter's door, and did he pound on that door with all his might? If you didn't know better, you'd think the door was going to break down and the house was going to shudder with all the pounding. Peter, just waking up about sunrise, couldn't imagine who in the world was pounding so hard on his door, and he opened the door to find a very angry looking, very menacing looking, very intimidating looking Count Anton snarling at him. You despicable human, you irresponsible wretch. Did you know that you let your animals go over onto my property and they've done extensive damage, and they knocked over one of my statues and broke its arm off and broke the nose off? And he ranted a little while longer as Peter kind of backed up, wondering what in the world. I know I shut the gate last night, he was saying to himself. Count then finished his rant and turned to Peter with more angry looks and says, Do you have enough money to compensate me and pay for all the damage your animals did to my property? Peter hung his head and shook his head. No, Count, I'm sorry. I know my animals were safely behind my gate, and I latched it last night. Well, you must not have done a good job because they were over there doing all that damage. And now since you say, you confess you do not have enough money to pay for all that damage, you will appear in the town square tomorrow morning, and there's going to be a court held in open court in the town square, and you will be there at 8:30. Peter, you must be there. Yes, sir, I'll be there. And with that, Count Anton stormed out. And if you could have seen his face, he had a sneer of evil smile on his face as he went back to his palatial mansion. And Peter shook his head and couldn't imagine. He knew that this was wrong, wrong, wrong. He knew that the scheming count was up to no good, but he had a prayer that night beside his bedside and said, Lord, if I have to suffer for you, so be it. But I thank you for my life. I thank you for all that you've given me and for Jesus. And I leave the court proceedings in your hands for tomorrow. Good night, my Lord. Amen. And he actually could turn off his brain. I can't do that very well when I'm worrying about something. He could turn off his brain and sleep like a good night's sleep. Where next door over at Count Anton's property, he was trying to sleep, and he was so happy that his plan had succeeded. He made sure he was up on time, and Peter was up on time, and they both traveled to 3/4 of a mile straight south to the city square. And sure enough, people were gathered. They had heard about this event somehow through the grapevine. There were a lot of people there to witness this court proceeding. Finally, the judge appeared in his robes and called the court to order. Said, plaintiff, what is your complaint against your neighbor, Peter? And then he recited about how much damage that his cow and his goat had done, and that Peter was irresponsible and a poor excuse for a human and a wretch that should not be allowed to get away with this. And he better pay me every bit of money that costs to restore my property to its proper beauty. Then the judge turned to Peter. Peter, is what the count says the truth? But your honor, I always lock my gate. But did your animals do the damage to the count's property? I don't know, sir. Count says so, and I don't have any proof. Well, I'm going to take the count's word for this, and you have to pay for the damage. But your honor, I have nothing. The judge, putting on his best face, was about to pronounce the judgment, and he finally did. He said, Peter, since you have no funds with which to repay the count, then I must render judgment in the favor of the count. You must relinquish all title to your house, your barn, your acreage, your animals, everything you own will now become the count's. And he shoved forward some paper of a deed transfer to the bailiff, pushed it over toward Peter on a little table and said, here, you have to sign this. And with little tears beginning to well up in the corner of Peter's eyes, he could hardly see through blurred vision, the tears clouding his eyes as he tried to sign his name. And he thought, oh, it's come to this. It's evil. It's evil. I know I didn't do all this. I don't deserve all this. And after he'd signed away all his property, Peter looked up and said, your honor, may I speak one more time? Yes, go ahead. Could I go to my house one more time for just a few moments and gather up a few things? I don't even know where I'm going to sleep tonight. Could I do that? Well, okay. Bailiff, you go with Peter, make sure he doesn't take anything of value, and you go up there and then have him get out of that house and be gone. And as Peter turned to leave, Count Anton blocked his way, wouldn't let him pass, and glared at him, said, you despicable human being. And then he reached up and jerked Peter's chin over to one side and spat on that cheek. Then he jerked his chin the other way and spat on the other cheek. And now 2 little rivers of spittle came down Peter's cheek to meet the tears that were coming down his eyes and drip off his chin as he could hardly compose and hold himself. In that culture, in those days, in that country, spitting on someone was the worst form of humiliation and degradation that could ever be done to a fellow human being. And they all looked down at Peter and thought, he is despicable. As Peter quickly left as fast as he could, headed and trudged north 3/4 of a mile, with every step being so heavy and hard. When he got home, he looked around for the last time. He picked up some dried biscuits, put them in a backpack with some figs and dates and a little bit of cheese that had been made from Tildy the goat, and a jacket, and put it all in his backpack. And as he turned to leave, the bailiff was looking at him. Peter knelt right there on the threshold, and for the last time, he prayed to the great God of heaven, who looks over his children, who hears every plaintive cry. And Peter left his little home for the last time, came down the driveway as the bailiff hurried back to town, and Peter turned west, didn't know where he was going to go for the night, and a big lump in his throat, but he was alive, and he thanked the Lord for his life. As he trudged on toward the west for 3 or 4 miles, then the road began to turn north along the west side of Romania, and he had forgotten one key thing. If you're out hiking on a dusty road a long time, you're going to get thirsty. And Peter had forgotten to put a little bottle of water. And he was very thirsty now and very tired. And as he went a little further north, he could see up there in the distance a bridge. And he thought, oh, maybe there's a stream there. And there was. And he got off the road, went down to the stream, and with handfuls of water, scooped them up to his mouth and had a good drink and a prayer of thanksgiving. And then he got back on the road, headed north, eating some of his dry biscuits and a fig or two as he trudged on. And he trudged on, and it was getting so that the shadows were growing longer along the road. He wondered where he might sleep, when just ahead, about a mile, he saw a little village. It was a small village. And he stumbled into the village and looked around. There was a boarding house, a tavern, where people can rent a room and do their drinking and eat a meal. And he went right on in, and the proprietor looked up at him and said, "Sir, you're not from around here, are you?" "No, I'm not." "Well, what can I do for you?" I was just wondering if I could rent a room for the night. And this is what I have." And he held out the few coins that he had. "Ha, that would never do. I charge 10 times that for one of my rooms." And Peter, with his head hung low, turned to leave. But something in the proprietor's heart melted, and he turned and said, "Sir, if you're willing to do all the chores I've lined up, my servant boy, my helper, got sick today, and if you can mop floors and clean the tables and scrub the pots and pans and wash the dishes and clean out the restroom, if you can do all that, you can stay for the night." And so it was arranged, and Peter offered a silent prayer of thanks. They had a place to stay for the night. And the next morning, as he got up, he wondered what he would do for breakfast, and he came down the stairs to where the breakfast was being served, and it smelled so good. And the proprietor looked up and said, "My, you did a fine job for me yesterday. Would you like some breakfast before you leave?" Would I? And offering another prayer of thanksgiving, Peter had a good breakfast. He then turned and left to continue his journey. And this kind of thing happened 2 or 3 times, till finally one evening it was getting late, and his food had been gone for 2 or 3 days already, and he was hungry, and he came into a larger village up in northern Romania. And this village had several inns and taverns and places to stay and other businesses. And he was walking down the main street, and he came to one, and he looked in the window, and here was a sign that said "Help Wanted." Well, Peter, that was all he needed. He knew he had a good work ethic, and he marched right in and looked the proprietor in the eye and said, "Sir, I'm answering the ad that you have in your window." "Well, who are you, sir?" "Well, I've trudged a long way, but I would sure like your job." "Do you do good work? Are you faithful? Are you lazy? Will you get the job done?" "Sir, I have the most excellent work ethic. For whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, my Bible says, and I do everything to the best of my ability." the proprietor sensed honesty in Peter's face, and he got the job, and he worked hard. He was able to take baths and shave and look like a whole new person. And after a week or so of this, Peter was at work and had just finished the chores for the morning when he heard trumpets being sounded from what sounded like down at the city square. And he turned and asked the proprietor, "What are those trumpets? What's going on?" "Those are saved. Those are long silver trumpets. They are heralding the arrival of some important person." Well, who would that be? "You don't know? Oh, yes, you're not from around here. Those trumpets are reserved for when the king comes to visit the towns. He likes to come and interview people and see how he might improve his government and be of better service to his subjects. And he'll be here soon." And with that, Peter put up his cleaning supplies, brushed his hair a little bit, and made his way to the town square. There were people already in line to be interviewed by the king, and soon the trumpets came out again with a little different blast, because the king was coming down Main Street with a beautiful white carriage drawn by 4 white horses, and with trimmings in purple and royal blue and gold on the carriage. And as it stopped there in the city square, a guard that had been riding on the carriage quickly got a step to put outside the door so the king could have a nice step to step on. And the king, in his resplendent robes, stepped down and stepped into the town square and looked around with satisfaction. He saw several of his subjects lining up to visit with him. And Peter was about 11th back in line. And as he watched the people talking to the king as they bowed and visited with him, he saw a kindly face on the king. It wasn't a face of haughtiness or "I'm better than you." And it gave him a little courage to think that maybe he could tell the king his story. And as the second person in line, and the third, and finally back to the 10th, and then it was his turn, and his knees began to feel weak and they would shake. And he found that as that person finished his conversation, it was his turn, and he was standing before the king. He could only hang his head, and his vocal cords would not work. He couldn't even speak. And the king finally said, "My good man, did you want to say something to your king?" "Yes, sir, I would like to." Well, speak on. I'm ready to hear you." And as Peter began to speak, the more he spoke, the more his vocal cords loosened up, and he was able to spill out the story in a torrent of sentences as little tears began to grow in his eyes, because it still hurt him to talk about how everything he owned had been taken from him. And if you had watched the king during this time, you would see the veins on his neck begin to bulge out and red come up in his face as he grew angrier and angrier. The king was getting angry. And Peter happened to glance up and thought, "Oh no, he's going to blast at me. He looks very angry." And finally he was through with his story. Then the king bellowed forth, "How dare any one of my subjects treat another one of my subjects like that count treated you? I can't believe if I could find him, I would make him pay." And with that, he motioned to his guard and servant, "Would you go back to the chariot, back to my carriage, and where I sit, underneath the left edge of the bench where I sit to ride, you'll find a pouch. Bring it quickly." And in less time than it takes to tell, the servant brought a beautiful leather pouch with gold tassels. It was bigger than a muskmelon, a cantaloupe, and it was heavy. And the king placed it in Peter's hands and said, "May this in some way recompense you for all that you lost and the misery that was heaped upon you. May I touch you?" What, your majesty? "May I touch you?" "Yes, sir." And with that, the king gently took Peter's chin and turned his face to one side and kissed Peter's cheek where that nasty man had spit on him. And then he turned Peter's face the other way and kissed that cheek. And he said, "Sir, my faithful subject, hold your head high. You never have to be ashamed. You never have to feel shame again, because the King has kissed away your shame. He has kissed it away, and you can hold your head high. Thank you, my good man, for telling me your story. And Peter could hardly wait to take that little pouch, hurrying back to his room up on second floor, and put the pouch carefully on his bed and undo the little gold tassels and gaze inside. And as he gazed inside this pouch that was heavy, what met his eye were hundreds of gold sovereigns, each one impressed, stamped with the kind face of his King. And that is like our Father in heaven kisses away our shame. Jesus bore our shame. And anything that we are called upon to give up, doesn't he many millions and trillions of times more repay? For how do you put a price on getting to see Jesus' face one day? How do you put a price on getting to live in a mansion he's gone to prepare for us? How do you put a price on eternal life? For that is what our King has done for us. Amen.
Thank you so much for that, Uncle Harold. We always love listening to your stories. And I think that one is probably my favorite yet. Okay, we'll have special music now.
Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to Thee. Take my moments
Okay, let's pray. Dear Jesus, thank you that you're always with us and you'll help us whenever we're in trouble, and help us this next week, and help us to be like you and share your word.